Bill Barr, face flushed and hands slamming the table, roared, "That's enough!" The sound reverberated like a cannon shot, startling even those who had grown accustomed to the chaos of political hearings. In that instant, the air seemed to shift. Reporters jolted upright, pens paused in mid-scribble, and cameras zoomed closer, desperate to catch every flicker of expression. It wasn't just an interruption. It was a challenge, raw, unfiltered, and dripping with arrogance. And then, time itself seemed to freeze. A narrator's voice might as well have cut through the tension. But America wasn't ready for what happened next, because what followed would transform an ordinary outburst into an extraordinary collision of values. This was not about legal arguments or political procedure anymore. This was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about who gets to raise their voice in America, and who is told to sit down, shut up, and disappear. The room carried an electric silence, the kind that lingers before a storm tears open the sky. Barr's eyes blazed with the certainty of someone long accustomed to dominance, someone who believed volume equaled victory. His fists clenched as though the force of his command could bend reality itself. Yet across the table sat a woman who did not flinch. Jasmine Crockett's composure was steady, her presence deliberate. She had seen this performance before, powerful men pounding tables, hoping rage could erase reason. But this time, the script would not play out as expected. Behind the cameras, viewers watching live were already leaning closer to their screens, their heartbeats quickening. Social media feeds began buzzing. Did Barr just yell at Crockett? He really thinks he can silence her? The seeds of outrage sprouted in real time, spreading like wildfire. The audience knew instinctively this moment was bigger than a single exchange. It was a battle line drawn in front of the nation. Because if Barr's thunder was meant to intimidate, Crockett's silence was its mirror image. Calm, patient, and unshaken. She embodied something deeper than defiance. She embodied every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Every voice dismissed as too loud, too different, too unworthy. And as she leaned forward, preparing to speak, a hush descended like a curtain falling before the climax of a play. When Jasmine Crockett leaned forward to reply, the room fell silent, and the entire nation leaned in. In today's America, every hearing feels less like a forum for truth and more like a stage for theater. The cameras roll, the microphones amplify, and the lines between governance and performance blur into something unrecognizable. Polarization has transformed the halls of power into arenas, where the goal is not clarity but spectacle, not justice but dominance. It is within this crucible that Bill Barr's outburst erupted, a single moment that became emblematic of a deeper fracture in the American story. This wasn't just one man yelling across a table. It was the weight of a political culture that has increasingly rewarded the loudest voices, the angriest fists, the most domineering personalities. When Barr slammed that table and thundered, "That's enough," he wasn't simply interrupting Jasmine Crockett. He was echoing a centuries-old pattern, men in power using force and bluster to drown out those they sought to marginalize. For millions watching, the moment rang familiar. It was the echo of boardrooms, classrooms, dinner tables, and parliaments where voices of women, immigrants, and people of color had been silenced time and again. And yet, the setting made it all the more dramatic. This was not a closed-door confrontation. It was broadcast across the nation, live-streamed into living rooms, dissected in real time by an audience hungry for authenticity. Americans tuned in not just to learn policy details, but to witness power dynamics unfold like a live drama. The hearing had morphed into a stage play, one where the villain's arrogance met its fiercest test. The stakes, then, were larger than Barr or Crockett. They spoke to the very identity of the country itself. Was America still a nation where volume could substitute for virtue? Or was it a place where dignity, intellect, and authenticity could finally pierce through the noise? For countless viewers, immigrants, activists, young people yearning for change, the confrontation became a mirror reflecting their own struggles. If Crockett could stand unbowed in that room, perhaps they too could find strength in theirs. As the clip replayed on screens and phones, audiences weren't asking, "What will she say?" They were asking, What does this mean for us? It was no longer a partisan quarrel. It was a cultural reckoning, a test of whether arrogance still ruled uncontested. And here's where the FOMO set in. Because what came next didn't just dominate headlines, it reshaped the conversation online, forever. Within minutes, hashtags sprouted like wildfire. Shot Crockett strong, Cyrus enough indeed. Stand with Jasmine. TikToks looped the silence after Barr's shout, splicing in dramatic music and captions that framed the moment as history in the making. Twitter became a battlefield of memes and declarations. Some mocking Barr's temper, others praising Crockett's composure. News outlets scrambled to edit breaking alerts, while commentators rushed to claim the narrative. The ripple effect reached beyond politics. In workplaces and family chats, people replayed the moment, not to argue policy, but to talk about identity, power, and respect. The nation wasn't debating legislation anymore, it was debating dignity itself. And so, the stakes were set. This wasn't about who won a hearing, but about who defined America's values in front of millions. Would the villain's rage become the lasting memory, or would the hero's response reshape the narrative? But before Crockett could deliver her thunderous reply, the villain's backstory revealed why his arrogance was destined to collapse. Bill Barr did not arrive in that chamber as a minor player. He carried with him the weight of decades spent at the pinnacle of American power, cloaked in the confidence of someone who had seen the system bend to his will more than once. Twice he had ascended to the role of Attorney General, each time cast as the steady hand, the guardian of order. To his supporters, he was the consummate Washington insider, a man who knew every corridor of power, every lever to pull, every line to toe. To his critics, he was something darker, an enabler of excess, a man who used the law not as a shield for the vulnerable, but as a fortress for the powerful. For years, Barr projected the aura of untouchability. He spoke with the measured cadence of someone used to having his words taken as gospel. His presence at hearings was often defined by dismissive smirks, clipped responses, and a subtle but unmistakable suggestion that his intellect outranked that of those questioning him. He cultivated an image of control calm, deliberate, above the fray. But behind that mask, critics argued, lay a man willing to bend truth, willing to twist law, willing to wield silence as a weapon to shield allies and punish dissenters. The contradictions in his career became glaring. The man who once prided himself on order now found himself unraveling in chaos. The lawyer who spoke reverently of institutions presided over some of their darkest stains. He had built his legacy on the promise of being the adult in the room. Yet in critical moments, he became the enabler of tantrums, the protector of excess. What once was presented as gravitas began to look more like arrogance, more like entitlement dressed in legal robes. And in that chamber, as his fist slammed the table, the facade cracked wide open. It was no longer the calm statesman speaking in reasoned tones. It was the red-faced man of power losing his composure on national television. The transformation was stunning, and in its own way, tragic. The man who had once wielded control now revealed desperation. For all his legal brilliance and political savvy, he resorted to volume and unspoken admission that his grip was loosening. Barr's behavior wasn't just arrogance, it was tone-deaf dismissal, a refusal to accept that the landscape had shifted. He had risen in a Washington where power was concentrated, where men like him rarely faced pushback that couldn't be brushed aside. But the country had changed. A new generation of leaders, young, unapologetic, diverse, was stepping into the arena. Their strength wasn't measured by how loudly they shouted, but by how calmly they stood their ground. And Barr, unable or unwilling to adapt, became a symbol of a fading order. The arrogance was palpable in every glance, every interruption, every attempt to dominate by sheer force of will. He believed his dominance still carried the same weight it once had, that his name and his stature could silence dissent as easily as before. But instead of cowing the opposition, his aggression exposed him. The very performance meant to project strength revealed weakness. The man who had spent decades cultivating authority now looked like someone grasping for it, unable to accept that authority was slipping through his fingers. The fall of Bill Barr. Then wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. It was the story of an old guard trying desperately to cling to relevance while the world moved on. His outburst crystallized that moment, transforming him in the public eye from the untouchable insider to the unraveling antagonist. The hearing, meant to showcase his command, instead revealed his fragility. And fragility, once exposed, is impossible to conceal. For viewers at home, the image was unforgettable. A man who once seemed so powerful reduced to pounding a table in frustration, as if sheer noise could drown out the tide of change pressing in around him. For all his decades of maneuvering, the scene would come to define him in ways no polished speech ever could. Yet while Barr basked in authority, a quiet storm was brewing one woman who refused to be silenced. Jasmine Crockett was never supposed to be here, not if you ask the gatekeepers of Washington. Her path didn't begin in ivy-covered lecture halls or elite think tanks. It began on the ground, in neighborhoods where politics wasn't an abstract debate, but a lived reality where housing insecurity, discrimination, and the blunt weight of inequality were daily obstacles. She carried those stories, not as talking points, but as truths etched into her own journey. From her earliest days, she understood something many in the Capitol still didn't. Representation isn't about power for its own sake. It's about standing tall for those whose voices are too often drowned out. Her rise was forged in the fires of grassroots organizing. Before the spotlight found her, Crockett was already known in her community as a fighter who refused to back down. She wasn't a polished insider. She was a defender, a sharp-tongued attorney who used the law not to protect the privileged, but to shield the vulnerable. In courtrooms across Texas, she stood shoulder to shoulder with clients who couldn't afford expensive counsel, people who had been told by the system itself that they didn't matter. For Crockett, the courtroom became training ground for something larger. Every cross-examination, every motion filed, every hard-won verdict built not just her skills but her steel. That sharpness, the quick wit, the cutting clarity soon became her signature. Where others minced words, she struck with precision. Where others hedged, she stood unapologetically. Critics called her brash. Admirers called her fearless. But to those who truly knew, she was something rarer, authentic. She didn't put on a mask to blend into the marble corridors of power. She walked in as herself, carrying the cadence of her community, the fire of her upbringing, and the refusal to ever play small. Her law career was more than a profession. It was preparation. Every obstacle was another rehearsal for the stage she would eventually command. She learned that intimidation was often just theater, that behind the bluster of opponents lay weakness, and that true strength came from patience, composure, and knowing when to strike. These lessons hardened into instincts that would serve her in a chamber where arrogance was currency and dignity was tested daily. Crockett's political journey began the way many underestimated figures begin, through the cracks of the establishment. She wasn't handed endorsements on a silver platter. She had to fight for every inch, campaigning with grit, knocking doors, making calls, and channeling the same energy she had once devoted to defending her clients. People responded not to polish but to passion. They saw in her a reflection of themselves, their frustrations, their dreams, their demand to be heard. Her arrival in Congress was itself a statement. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to disrupt, to bring with her the fire of those who had been told their concerns were too small, their voices too loud, their presence too much. She understood better than anyone what it meant to be dismissed, and she carried that weight into every hearing, every debate, every confrontation. That was the woman who sat across from Bill Barr on the day of his eruption. Not an intimidated newcomer, but an attorney who had stared down hostility before. Not a politician desperate for approval, but a representative forged in the furnace of struggle. When Barr slammed the table, he wasn't just shouting at Crockett. He was shouting at every underdog who had ever been underestimated, every immigrant who had been told to know their place, every woman of color who had been silenced in boardrooms, classrooms, and legislatures. And Jasmine Crockett carried them all in that moment. She carried every voice that had ever been dismissed, every American told to sit down and be quiet. That was her armor. That was her fire. It wasn't arrogance. It was authenticity. It wasn't bluster. It was resolve. And while Barr drew on decades of entitlement, Crockett drew on a lifetime of defiance. Her story, in many ways, had been leading to this confrontation. Every courtroom battle, every grassroots campaign, every moment she had been told no, prepared her for this yes, this opportunity to face power, to stand her ground, and to show the nation what dignity under pressure looks like. The hearing wasn't just another day at work. It was the culmination of a journey defined by resilience, sharpened by injustice, and fueled by an unwavering belief in the worth of every voice. And when arrogance finally collided with authenticity, sparks flew in front of the entire nation. The moment stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Bill Barr leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing as if daring Jasmine Crockett to challenge him again. His fingers drummed impatiently on the polished wood before he lunged forward with another booming interruption. "You're twisting the facts," he barked, his tone dripping with condescension, his voice attempting to drown hers out once more. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She didn't rise to meet his anger with her own. Instead, she held her ground with the same deliberate calm that had carried her through courtrooms and campaigns. Her eyes stayed locked on him, unshaken, unbroken, as if to remind him that composure itself was its own form of power. Barr's interruptions came like waves, swelling, crashing, desperate to erode her footing. Each time she began to speak, he cut across her sentences, raising his volume as though loudness could substitute for logic. His frustration boiled over, his voice growing sharper, his jabs more reckless. The performance that once commanded authority now betrayed insecurity. And yet across the table, Crockett remained steady, letting the storm howl around her without ever losing her balance. The room began to react in subtle, but unmistakable ways. Staffers exchanged wary glances, reporters scribbled faster, their pens scratching like flint against paper. A soft murmur rippled through the chamber as onlookers shifted in their seats, uneasy at the spectacle unfolding before them. When Barr's hand slammed down once more to punctuate his words, an audible gasp fluttered through the audience. The tension was no longer hidden, it was thick enough to choke on. Crockett's silence in those moments became louder than Barr's outbursts. She let him exhaust himself, let his voice echo until it collapsed under its own weight. Every time she paused, every time she held her gaze steady, she reminded the room that restraint can cut deeper than rage. Where he burned hot and reckless, she stood cool and deliberate. That contrast was impossible to ignore. Observers watching the live stream began commenting in real time. "Why won't he let her finish? She's calm. He's losing it." Clips circulated even before the hearing adjourned, with split-screen shots of Barr's flushed face and Crockett's collected composure. To millions, the visual alone told the story. One man unraveling, one woman refusing to bend. Inside the chamber, the murmurs grew louder. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in with anticipation, sensing that something pivotal was about to happen. Barr, blinded by his own temper, failed to notice the tide turning against him. Each interruption meant to silence Crockett only amplified her presence. Each outburst, meant to dominate, only underscored his weakness. And still, Crockett waited. Patient, poised, almost surgical in her control of the moment. She let the air grow heavy with anticipation, knowing that timing was everything. Because she understood what Barr did not. That sometimes the most devastating blows are delivered not in the heat of rage, but in the quiet precision of a carefully measured reply. The room, once buzzing with murmurs, seemed to hold its breath. Reporters stopped scribbling. Phones hovered in mid-air, recording every flicker of expression. Every eye was locked on the two figures at the center of the storm. One man, voice cracking under the weight of his fury, and one woman, calm as stone, ready to turn the tide. But nothing could prepare anyone for the moment Jasmine unleashed her calm but devastating counterattack. The silence stretches like a wire drawn taut, humming with the pressure of everything unsaid. Jasmine Crockett inhales once, slow, unhurried, as if measuring the moment with the care of a surgeon before the first incision. She lets the din of outrage collapse into a clean quiet, and when she finally speaks, the room leans toward her voice as if gravity itself has shifted. "Attorney General," she begins, each syllable polished, controlled, deliberate. "I heard you the first time. America heard you. Now it's time you hear us." She waits a heartbeat 1, 2, like a conductor raising a baton. "You can shout, 'That's enough,' into a microphone," she says. "But you cannot shout down the truth. You cannot shout down the people we serve. And you will not shout down me." The cadence lands like steady drums. She threads the room onto a single line of attention. "Here's what's enough," she continues, voice soft but edged with steel. "Enough of the table slams. Enough of the condescension. Enough of pretending volume is virtue. Enough of imagining that a woman's calm is weakness. We know this act. We have lived with it long enough." Crockett tilts her head, just enough to signal that precision matters. "You've had years of microphones and cameras and podiums," she says. "Years to turn hearings into theater. Years to make Americans believe that power is the loudest voice in the room. But power is not noise. Power is service. Power is accountability. Power is a simple answer to a simple question." She lifts the question like a blade. "Why were you so afraid of mine?" Barr's shoulders shift. The posture that once filled space now seems to retreat from it. He clears his throat, but the sound dies as quickly as it begins. Cameras tighten, framing his face, collecting the telltale signs: tension at the jaw, a restless glance, the minimal smile that makes denial look like habit. Crockett doesn't hurry. "We are not here to audition for cable news," she says. "We are here because families out there are deciding between rent and medicine, because teachers out there are buying their own classroom supplies, because workers out there are told to clock in, keep quiet, and be grateful. When you tell me that's enough, you are telling them to stop asking why their government forgets their names, and I will not forget their names. Let me remind you," she says, "that government is not a private club. It is not a fortress for the comfortable. It is a house with doors, and I intend to keep them open." Her voice brightens just slightly, not in volume, but in conviction. "So if you believe slamming a table can seal them shut, you have mistaken thunder for law." A ripple of sound, half gasp, half laugh, moves through the chamber. "And there is one more thing," she adds. "You told me, 'That's enough,' the way so many of our people have been told in 1,000 rooms for 1,000 years. That we've had enough chances, enough questions, enough presence. But we are not guests in this democracy. We are the authors. We are the editors. We are the voice that does not fade at the first sign of a storm." The rhythm climbs. Short lines, sharp edges. "That, sir, is enough." Crockett lays out the facts, each point a rung in a ladder she builds under the country's feet. "You said order," she ticks off, "but delivered chaos. You said respect, but practiced dismissal. You said truth, but gave performance. Order is listening. Respect is answering. Truth is transparent. If you have it, show it. If you lost it, say so. If you never had it, stop hiding behind thunder." She keeps the tempo exact. She repeats key phrases, turning them into anchors. Order is listening. Respect is answering. Truth is transparent. Each repetition sinks deeper. A chorus meant to be quoted, stitched into highlight reels, written onto cardboard signs. Barr tries to interject a breath half-shaped into a word, but she raises a hand without raising her voice. "You've had your minutes," she says, not unkindly. "Give the country theirs." Crockett's eyes sweep the room. "The people are not fragile," she says. "They can handle honesty. They can handle accountability. What they cannot handle, what they will not accept, is the idea that shouting is leadership." She lets the sentence sit like a bell note lingering after the strike. Leadership is the courage to answer the question asked. "So I will ask again." She enunciates the question, crystalline, inescapable. The specifics slice cleanly. The logic corners its target. No bluster, no flourish, just the unavoidable scaffolding of fact. As she walks through dates, memos, contradictions, the narrative tightens around the man who once commanded the room simply by arriving in it. The cameras notice. The public notices. The numbers swell. Commentators adjust their notes between breaths. Crockett senses the turn and does not waste it. There is a difference, she says, between being in charge and being accountable. One is granted, the other is earned. Today, America is asking you to earn it. The room listens. Even the air seems to hold steady while the meaning lands. She lowers her voice again, choosing impact over volume. You wanted a moment. Here it is. Use it. Answer the question. A last instinct flares in him, but it is too late. The rudeness that once worked, the scowl that once steadied him, none of it meets the moment. The chamber belongs to whoever respects it. And right now, that is her. She delivers the final progression in a measured crescendo, every clause tightening the vice. Service over swagger, truth over theater, democracy over demand. We do not work for your comfort, she says. We work for their future. She gestures not to the walls, not to the desk, but to the imagined million students, nurses, bus drivers, small business owners whose names she promised to remember. And then she closes the circle. You said, that's enough. Here's my reply. Enough table thumping. Enough spin. Enough pretending that fear is authority. From now on, we will ask, and you will answer. That is how this works. That is how it will work today. The room exhales. Somewhere a camera light clicks off and on as if blinking. Somewhere a child at home asks what she meant, and a parent says, she meant us. She leans back, not triumphant, but grounded, as if planting the flag of a principle rather than a person. The line has been drawn, and it is not moving. What happened afterwards sent shockwaves through every corner of the country. The chamber's silence cracked open into a storm that no one could contain. By the time Jasmine Crockett leaned back from the microphone, the moment had already escaped the confines of Washington. It was no longer just a congressional exchange, it was a national event. The first clip surfaced online within minutes, and by the time the hearing adjourned, the internet had transformed her mic drop into a cultural earthquake. On Twitter, hashtags trended before Barr had even left his chair. Enough indeed. You're Crockett strong. Voice unshaken. Edits of the clip flooded timelines, some paired with dramatic soundtracks. Others looped her final line again and again, turning her words into a rallying cry. TikTok creators stitched reactions into the footage, their mouths dropping open as they watched her calmly dismantle the man who had tried to silence her. Within hours, millions of views poured in. Memes sprouted like wildfire. One showed Barr pounding the table next to a toddler throwing blocks across the floor, captioned, "Spot the difference." Another captured Crockett's composed stare, side by side with a lioness crouched in the grass. Instagram posts echoed with captions, "Dignity doesn't shout, it speaks." Even late-night hosts couldn't resist, replaying her words with comic timing, the audience laughing not at Crockett, but at the image of a once powerful man shrinking in his chair. Supporters filled the digital airwaves with praise. She spoke for all of us who've been told to sit down. This is what real leadership looks like. Finally, someone who doesn't flinch. Even critics who usually dismissed her politics admitted grudging respect. I don't agree with her, but she handled him better than anyone else could. The consensus across divides was clear. Barr had tried to control the moment, but Crockett had owned it. News anchors replayed the exchange in heavy rotation, some analysts focusing on the substance of her points, others marveling at her delivery. One commentator called it a masterclass in composure under fire. Another compared it to the great debate moments of American history, where a single reply crystallized larger truths about power, justice, and who gets to be heard. Celebrities joined the chorus, amplifying her words to audiences far beyond politics. Musicians tweeted lyrics inspired by her cadence. Athletes posted clips with captions like, "This is how you keep your cool under pressure." Even actors known for playing courtroom dramas remarked on her precision. This was better than anything in a script. Every repost, every shout-out carried her words to new audiences, until the reply became less about Washington and more about culture itself. And yet, the reactions weren't only celebratory. The confrontation sparked a nationwide debate. In workplaces, people replayed the clip during lunch breaks, arguing about decorum, power, and what leadership means. In classrooms, students dissected her rhetoric, noting how silence could wield as much force as shouting. At dinner tables, families debated whether America had finally reached a turning point where calm courage could triumph over bluster. For many, Crockett became a stand-in for their own experiences. Women recalled moments of being interrupted in meetings and nodded with satisfaction as she reclaimed the floor. Immigrants remembered being told they'd asked enough questions and now saw their struggle reframed as resilience. Young people posted about how her composure gave them hope that authenticity could survive in a system built to crush it. The ripple effects grew into waves. Political strategists dissected the viral moment, noting its resonance with younger voters, its spread beyond partisan circles, its potential to inspire a new style of leadership rooted not in volume but in values. Editorials framed the clash as a metaphor for a generational shift, an old guard unraveling, a new guard refusing to be dismissed. Barr's defenders tried to spin the narrative, arguing that his anger was justified, that the clip was taken out of context. But their voices drowned beneath the roar of a country that had already chosen its interpretation. In the court of public opinion, volume had lost to vision, and no frantic press release could reverse it. By the week's end, the moment was etched into memory. It wasn't simply that Crockett had silenced a powerful man, it was that she had transformed a hearing into a referendum on dignity. The debate had shifted from what was said in that room to what it meant for America. Was this the dawn of a politics where authenticity outshone arrogance, or merely a flash before the system snapped back to its old habits? That question lingered in every headline, every conversation, every viral edit replayed again and again. But Jasmine didn't just win the moment. She transformed it into a universal truth that struck deep. When the noise faded and the headlines cooled, what remained was not just a clip or a meme, but a lesson written into the fabric of the moment. Jasmine Crockett reframed the confrontation, not as a personal victory, but as a universal reminder. Dignity will always outshine rage, and service will always outlast entitlement. The hearing may have been one skirmish in the endless churn of Washington politics, but its meaning stretched far beyond those walls. Crockett herself put it plainly in follow-up interviews. "I wasn't there to win an argument," she explained. "I was there to serve the people who sent me." That distinction carried weight. It shifted the focus from personalities to principles, from theater to truth. She had not raised her voice, not slammed her fist, not demanded the spotlight. Instead, she embodied the quiet but unshakable truth that real authority is earned, not shouted into existence. For the audience, the contrast could not have been clearer. On one side, arrogance loud, red-faced, impatient, believing dominance is its own justification. On the other, dignity measured, thoughtful, calm, reminding us that leadership is not about silencing others but about amplifying what matters. Barr's outburst was meant to command submission. Crockett's reply commanded respect. The difference was unmistakable. The resonance of her words flowed into a broader moral. "In a democracy," she declared, "voices rise not by volume, but by values." It was more than a soundbite, it was a credo. It spoke to every American who had ever felt drowned out by bluster, overshadowed by privilege, dismissed by those in power. It reasserted the radical promise of democracy itself, that power belongs not to the loudest, but to the just. And in that framing, the story transcended Barr and Crockett entirely. This was no longer about a man pounding a table or a woman holding her ground. It was about America itself, about whether our politics would continue rewarding arrogance or rediscover the strength of dignity, about whether service could once again mean sacrifice rather than status, about whether truth could survive in an age addicted to spectacle. Crockett's mic drop wasn't just a retort, it was a reminder of possibility, that the country doesn't have to settle for leaders who mistake anger for strength, that authenticity still has the power to cut through noise, that when confronted with entitlement, calm conviction can pierce deeper than fury ever will. The crescendo built not in shouts, but in echoes. Churches repeated her words from pulpits, Classrooms analyzed her cadence as an example of rhetoric that teaches as much as it persuades. Organizers stitched her lines into chants at rallies, proof that one person's resolve could become a chorus of many. This was bigger than Barr vs. Crockett, commentators observed. It was a mirror held up to the country, and in that mirror, Americans glimpsed both the danger and the hope. The danger of arrogance masquerading as authority, and the hope of dignity reclaiming its place at the center of public life. For millions, the lesson was personal. Parents pointed to Crockett as an example for their daughters' strength without bitterness, clarity without cruelty. Workers saw in her composure the reflection of their own quiet endurance, day after day, against bosses or systems that shouted them down. Immigrants recognized in her resilience the echo of their own journeys, uninvited by the gatekeepers, yet unstoppable once inside. The story's moral was clear. Rage fades, entitlement crumbles, but dignity endures. And real service outlasts every table slam, every raised voice, every attempt to declare, "That's enough," and that's why this story is far from over. It belongs to you now. Bill Barr may have slammed the table and shouted, "That's enough," but Jasmine Crockett's reply proved that it was only the beginning. The video title captured the shock of the moment, but the truth behind it runs even deeper. Her response wasn't just words, it was a stand for justice, a declaration that dignity will never bow to arrogance. What America witnessed in that chamber was more than a clash of personalities. It was a reminder of who we are and who we can be. Barr's outburst was loud, but it faded. Crockett's words were calm, but they echoed. That difference is the difference between theater and truth, between power that bullies and power that serves. So the question is no longer about what happened in that room, it's about what happens next. Does America settle for leaders who slam their fists and silence dissent? Or does it rise with leaders who answer with courage, composure, and conviction? Crockett showed us that silence can be broken, that arrogance can be humbled, and that one voice, steady and fearless, can move a nation. And now, that voice calls to you. If you believe dignity beats arrogance, share this story. If you believe justice is louder than rage, subscribe and stand with us. If you believe that no one should ever be told that's enough when they are speaking truth, then join this movement. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, it is a chorus. And your voice matters. Never let anyone silence it. Never let anyone tell you that your questions, your courage, your presence are enough. Jasmine Crockett proved the opposite. The fight continues, and it belongs to all of us.